They tell you that the woods are healing. They tell you that the silence of the wilderness is where you find yourself. But after what I encountered in the Ozark National Forest, I realized that the silence isn't empty. It's waiting. My name is Owen, and I used to be an experienced solo camper. I wasn't afraid of bears or mountain lions or the dark, but I learned the hard way that there are things in the deep brush that don't have a name, things that don't belong to our world, but mimic it perfectly. This is the story of why I will never go back into the trees. This is the story of the Whistler. It was mid-October. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. I had hiked 6 miles off the main trail, seeking a spot near a creek I'd seen on an old topographic map. I wanted total isolation. No cell service, no GPS, just me and the ancient oaks. By 5 p.m., I had my tent pitched, a small orange dome that felt like a fortress against the encroaching shadows. I remember the sun dipping below the ridge, casting long, skeletal shadows across the forest floor. It was beautiful. At least that's what I told myself as the first chill of the night settled in. The first thing I noticed wasn't a sound. It was the lack of one. Around 6:30 p.m., the forest went completely silent. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustle of a breeze. It was that heavy silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. I sat by my small stove, eating my dinner, but I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on the back of my neck. I kept spinning around, my headlamp cutting through the tree line, expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes reflecting back. But there was nothing, just the gray trunks of the trees standing like silent witnesses. I crawled into my sleeping bag early, laughing at my own paranoia. I thought I was alone. I was wrong. I must have drifted off for a couple of hours, because when I snapped awake, my watch read 3:12 a.m. The fire was dead. The air inside the tent was freezing, my breath forming a faint mist in the glow of my lantern. And then it started. From somewhere deep in the tree line, a low melodic whistle drifted through the air. It wasn't the chaotic chirp of a bird or the howling of the wind. It was a tune, human-like, rhythmic, and hauntingly beautiful. It sounded like an old folk song, something your grandmother might hum while rocking a chair. But there was no house for miles, no other hikers. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound wasn't moving. It stayed in one spot, about 50 yards to my left. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the brush. The light hit the thick canopy of leaves, but I saw nothing. The moment my light hit the area, the whistling stopped. Instantly. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, staring at the tent zipper, waiting for a hand to reach through. The second night, I should have left. Every instinct in my gut was screaming at me to pack up and run. But the sun has a way of making the terrors of the night seem like a dream. I stayed. I even convinced myself it was just a prankster or some hermit living in the hills. But as the sun dipped below the horizon again, the atmosphere changed. It felt like the forest was leaning in, closing the gap between the trees and my campsite. This time, the whistling started earlier, 1 a.m., and it was closer. It wasn't 50 yards away anymore. It was just at the edge of my clearing. The tune had changed, too. It was sharper, more frantic, like a broken record skipping on the same high note. Then I heard a sound that made my skin crawl, a heavy, bipedal step. Something was walking in a circle around my tent. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The dry leaves snapped under a weight that sounded much heavier than a man. Every few steps, it would stop and let out that long, dragging whistle. It was testing me. It was waiting for me to come out.
By the third night, terror had replaced logic. I hadn't slept in 48 hours. I sat in the center of my tent, clutching my hunting knife so hard my knuckles were white. The whistling didn't start from the woods this time. It started from right outside the fabric of my tent. I could hear the rhythmic, wet breathing. And then the whistle. It was so loud it vibrated through the floor. The creature began to lean against the tent. I saw the nylon fabric stretch inward as something heavy pressed against it. A long, thin indentation appeared, like a finger with too many joints, tracing the outline of my head from the other side. Then came the voice. It didn't speak words, it mimicked me. It whispered my own name in a raspy, distorted version of my own voice. Help me. It was followed by that same melodic whistle. It was trying to trick my brain, trying to get me to unzip the door. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed for the sun. The moment the first rays of dawn hit the clearing, the pressure against the tent vanished. I didn't even pack my gear. I grabbed my keys, my camera, and I ran. I didn't look back until I was locked inside my truck, miles away. When I finally got home and pulled the footage from my trail camera, I expected to see a bear or a person in a mask. What I saw haunts my dreams. The camera had triggered 50 times. In the first few shots, you could see a tall gray blur lurking behind the oaks. But in the final photo, taken at 5:55 a.m., the creature was standing right in front of the lens. It was nearly 8 feet tall, with skin the color of wet ash. It had no eyes, only smooth, pale skin where a face should be. But it had a mouth, a wide, lipless hole that was permanently pulled into a circle. It was holding my discarded camp stove in its spindly hands, looking directly into the camera, as if it knew I would be watching this later. I live in the city now, surrounded by concrete and streetlights. But sometimes, when the wind dies down and the street is quiet, I hear it. A faint, melodic whistle coming from the alleyway behind my apartment. It didn't stay in the Ozarks. It followed the sound of my fear, and now it's just waiting for me to look out the window. There are games you play for fun. And then there are games you play because you don't know any better. I was a journalist, smart, skeptical, and looking for the story of a lifetime. That's how I found Rob, a man who claimed to have discovered a path to another world. He didn't call it a portal, he called it a game. The rules he gave us were deceptively simple. Find a specific road in Phoenix, Arizona. Take the first left, then the first right, then the next left, and the next right. You must keep this pattern perfectly, no matter what you see, no matter where the road leads you. Rob warned our group of explorers, do not stop the car, do not get out, and most importantly, do not talk to the hitchhikers. I joined the convoy of cars, thinking it was just some elaborate urban legend. But as we made the 10th turn, the city of Phoenix began to fade. The skyscrapers were replaced by a landscape that didn't appear on any map. The sky turned a bruised shade of purple, and the road ahead became an endless stretch of gray asphalt that seemed to swallow the light. We had left our world behind, and as I looked in my rearview mirror, I realized the road behind us was gone. There was no turning back now. We pushed deeper into the silent landscape. No birds, no wind, just the rhythmic hum of my tires on the endless gray road. By the 20th turn, the environment changed again. The trees were no longer wood. They looked like twisted iron, their branches reaching out like rusted claws under that bruised purple sky. Suddenly, I saw a figure up ahead. Standing on the shoulder of the road was a man. He was wearing a tattered suit, holding a cardboard sign that was completely blank. As my car approached, he didn't stick out his thumb. He just watched us, his head turning in perfect sync with my car's movement. Rob's voice crackled over the radio, sounding tense. Keep your windows up. Do not look him in the eyes, and whatever you do, do not unlock the doors. One of the cars in the back, driven by a guy named Apollo, began to slow down. He thought it was a test. He thought the man needed help. I watched in horror through my rear-view mirror as Apollo's brake lights flickered on. The hitchhiker didn't move towards his door. He simply unhinged his jaw. A sound erupted from his throat, not a scream, but the exact sound of Apollo's car stalling. The hitchhiker wasn't looking for a ride. He was hunting. Apollo's car went dark, and then it was pulled into the shadows. We drove for hours in a world that felt like it was still rendering. The colors were too sharp, the shadows too long. Then we reached turn 40. The road led us into a city that looked exactly like Phoenix, but everything was wrong. The buildings were there, but they were made of something that looked like gray clay. There were no windows, no doors, just flat, blank surfaces. And the people, they were standing on the sidewalks, frozen in mid-motion. Some were pointing at the sky, others were mid-scream, their faces stretched into impossible shapes. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my hands went numb. "Don't look at them," Rob's voice crackled over the radio again. "If you acknowledge them, you become part of the scenery. Just keep driving." As I passed a statue of a woman holding a child, I saw her eyes move. They didn't just look at me, they tracked my car with a desperate, weeping intensity. She wasn't a statue, she was trapped. The further we went, the more the city began to melt. The asphalt turned soft like black tar, trying to pull my wheels down into the depths. I didn't look back. I just kept my eyes on the next left turn. praying the road would hold. We reached turn 56, and that's when everything shattered. One of the cars, a silver sedan driven by a woman named Eve, couldn't take the pressure anymore. She missed a right turn, just by a few inches. Over the radio, all I heard was a static-filled scream. I looked in my side mirror and saw her car invert. It didn't crash. It folded in on itself like a piece of paper, shrinking and crushing until it was nothing but a tiny metallic cube on the side of the road. "Keep driving," Rob shouted through the comms. His voice was cold, devoid of any pity. The road doesn't forgive mistakes. The sky was no longer purple. It was a void, a pitch-black abyss that seemed to be leaking into our world. Massive, translucent hands began to descend from the clouds, sweeping across the landscape like giant harvesters. They weren't looking for us. They were clearing the path. I felt the steering wheel vibrate with an intensity that made my teeth ache. The road began to hum, a low, guttural sound that vibrated in my chest. It sounded like a hunger. We were no longer just players in a game. We were intruders, and the road was starting to notice us.
By turn 70, only Rob and I were left. The other cars had been claimed by the road, swallowed by mistakes I couldn't even understand. The asphalt ahead began to glow with a pale, sickly light. We had reached the end of the map. "Stop the car," Rob's voice came over the radio one last time. It wasn't a command anymore. It was a plea. I braked hard, my tires screaming against the tar. In front of us stood a massive iron gate, stretching up into the void where the sky used to be. I stepped out of the car, ignoring the rule I had followed for hours. The air tasted like copper and old paper. Rob stood by his truck, looking at the gate with a mixture of awe and pure terror. "I found it," he whispered, "the place where the world stops pretending." But as he reached out to touch the iron, the gate didn't open. It began to speak, not with words, but with the voices of everyone we had lost. I heard Eve, I heard Apollo, their voices calling out from the metal, begging me to join them. I didn't wait for Rob. I scrambled back into my car and threw it in reverse. I didn't follow the pattern. I didn't care about left or right. I just drove blindly until the purple sky faded and the sun of Arizona burned my eyes. I made it back, but sometimes when I'm driving late at night, my GPS glitches. It tells me to take a left, then a right, and for a split second, the road ahead turns gray. When I was 6 years old, my kindergarten class started a project called the Penpal Project. We each tied a self-addressed envelope to a helium balloon and released them into the sky, hoping someone far away would find it and write back. Most of my classmates got letters from people in the next town over, or even a few states away, but for weeks I got nothing. I thought my balloon had just popped in the trees or landed in the ocean. Then the first letter arrived. There was no return address. Inside was a single, blurry photograph. It was a picture of my house, taken from the edge of the woods behind our backyard. Being a kid, I didn't find it creepy. I thought it was cool that my friend knew where I lived. I wrote back, asking who they were. A week later, I got another photo.
This time, it was a photo of me, sleeping in my own bed, taken through my bedroom window. I showed it to my mom, thinking she'd be happy I finally had a pen pal. I'll never forget the way the color drained from her face. She didn't say a word. She just grabbed the phone and called the police. That was the day my childhood ended, but it was only the beginning of his obsession. After the police came, my life changed. The window in my room was boarded up, and I wasn't allowed to play outside after sunset. But as a kid, you don't stay scared forever. You start to think that maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. One afternoon, I was playing near the creek at the edge of our property. It was a beautiful day. The sun filtered through the oaks, and for a moment I felt completely safe. Then I heard it, the sound of dry leaves crunching behind me. I froze. I didn't turn around immediately. I waited, listening to the rhythm of the steps. They weren't the steps of an animal. They were slow, deliberate, and they stopped every time I stopped. I started walking faster, my heart hammering against my ribs. The footsteps behind me picked up the pace too. Every time I glanced back, all I saw were the flickering shadows of the trees. He was there. I knew he was there. I finally broke into a sprint, screaming for my mom as I reached the back porch. A few months passed, and the man in the woods hadn't been seen again. The police patrolled our street, but they found nothing. I started to think that maybe he'd finally moved on, until the day I lost my favorite toy car. I was playing on the back porch when it rolled off the edge and disappeared into the dark crawl space underneath. I didn't want to go down there. It was dusty, cramped, and smelled of old dirt. But I needed that car. I grabbed a flashlight and crawled through the small wooden latch. As the beam of light swept across the spider webs, it hit something that didn't belong. It wasn't my toy. It was a small cardboard box tucked neatly into a corner near the house foundation. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were dozens of Polaroids. All of them were of me. Me eating breakfast. Me doing homework. Me playing in the yard. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the box, I found a collection of souvenirs, my missing toothbrush, a lock of my hair, and a drawing I had made in school that I thought I'd lost. He hadn't been watching me from the woods. He had been living under our house for weeks. The realization made me vomit right there in the dirt. I scrambled out of the crawl space, gasping for air, realizing that every time I felt a draft in the floorboards, it was the sound of him breathing, just inches beneath my feet.
We moved the next day. My parents didn't even wait to pack everything. We just took what we could fit in the car and left. Years went by, and I grew up. The memories of the Penpal became a dull ache in the back of my mind. But the story didn't end with us moving. 10 years later, I received a call from an old neighbor. They were renovating our old house, pulling up the floorboards in my old bedroom. They found something, not just a box, but a hollowed-out space big enough for a man to lie flat. Inside that space, they found a notebook. It was filled with entries, dates, and times of everything I did. He brushed his teeth at 8:05. He cried at 9:12 because he lost his car. And on the very last page, written the night we moved out, He's gone. I have to find a new way to be with him. The police eventually tracked a DNA sample from a discarded blanket found in that crawl space. It belonged to a man who had been missing for over a decade. A man who had no family, no records, nothing. He hadn't just been a stalker. He was a ghost who had decided I was his only reason to exist. I'm an adult now, with a family of my own, but every night before I go to sleep, I do one thing. I don't just lock the doors. I don't just check the windows. I get down on my hands and knees, and I look under the floorboards, because I know he's still out there, and he's still waiting for a reply.